Hey everyone, welcome to my channel where the strange, the unexplained, and the downright creepy come to life. From real-life encounters with the paranormal to bizarre, true stories that'll keep you up at night, I bring you the eerie tales you won't hear anywhere else. If you're into late-night chills, mysterious happenings, and things that go bump in the night, you're in the right place. Subscribe, buckle up, and let's dive into the unknown. The first night I spent in that Victorian room in Cardiff, I dismissed the subtle movement of my coffee mug as a hallucination brought on by fatigue. By the third night, I could no longer deny it. With each hollow tick of the ornate wall clock, objects shifted, imperceptibly at first, then unmistakably, gliding across surfaces in perfect synchronization with the pendulum's swing. I had come to Wales as part of a linguistics exchange program, eager to study regional dialects and immerse myself in the ancient culture. The rental had seemed a bargain, a spacious second-floor room in a 19th-century townhouse near Cardiff University. Mrs. Pritchard, the elderly landlady, had seemed oddly hesitant as she showed me the room. Her gnarled fingers trembled slightly when she handed over the heavy iron key. She mentioned something vague about the room having particular habits, but quickly changed the subject when I asked her to elaborate. As she shuffled away down the creaking hallway, her parting words lingered. "Mind the clock. It keeps its own counsel." The room itself was perfect for my 6-month stay. High ceilings, large windows overlooking a courtyard garden, and heavy oak furniture that exuded permanence and history. The only discordant element was the wall clock, an imposing mahogany piece with brass fittings and a pendulum that seemed to swing longer than physics should allow. Its face displayed no numbers, only strange symbols, somewhere between Celtic knots and mathematical notations. I assumed it was decorative, a piece of Welsh artisanry, until I realized it kept perfect time despite the unfamiliar markings. 3 nights in, I woke at precisely 3:17 a.m. with a distinct sense of wrongness. The moonlight illuminated the room strangely. My books, laptop, and water glass had shifted several inches from where I'd left them. Not knocked over or disturbed, but methodically repositioned, as though by a meticulous hand. I stayed awake, watching. With mounting unease, I observed each precise tick of the clock match the near-microscopic movement of every unsecured object. By morning, my coffee mug had traveled 8 inches across the desk. I confronted Mrs. Pritchard over breakfast. Her response was frustratingly vague. A non-committal shrug, followed by a comment about how old houses settle in strange ways. When I described the synchronized movement in detail, her face paled. She muttered something about former tenants having overactive imaginations, then abruptly excused herself. It was clear I would get no direct answers. The university library offered nothing on chronological displacement or temporal anomalies in Welsh architecture. My colleagues laughed off my increasingly desperate questions about local paranormal activity. Dr. Evans from the physics department suggested vibrations from nearby underground rail lines, but his theory didn't explain the perfect synchronization with the ticking or why it only happened in my room. After a week of restless sleep and rising anxiety, I decided to rearrange the furniture. Moved the bed to the opposite wall, placed the desk under the window, and most importantly, attempted to remove the clock. It wouldn't budge. Though it appeared to hang from a simple brass hook, the timepiece refused to move. The wood beneath my fingers felt unnaturally warm, almost pulsing. The longer I touched it, the more intense my vertigo became. I gave up when my nose began to bleed. That night, the changes became worse. Objects no longer moved in straight lines but in elaborate patterned paths. My keys traced small circles on the nightstand. My shoes rotated slowly by the door. A pen rolled uphill across the slanted desk. I documented everything obsessively, timestamps, measurements, sketches, as though academic precision could somehow impose order on the chaos. The ticking grew louder too, a deep, hollow knock that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull. Sleep became impossible. In the darkness, the ticking was joined by the whisper of sliding objects. My academic work deteriorated. Colleagues commented on my disheveled appearance, the dark circles beneath my eyes, my jumpiness at ordinary sounds. In desperation, I stuffed cotton in my ears and draped a towel over the clock before bed on the 10th night. I woke to find the cotton pushed from my ears, and the towel neatly folded on my chest. The ticking sounded triumphant. The breaking point came when I realized the room's dimensions had started to shift. Measurements taken morning and night varied by several inches. The ceiling felt higher at noon, lower at midnight. The space between desk and bed fluctuated throughout the day. Pressing my palm against the wall, I felt a subtle pulsing beneath the plaster, as if the entire room were breathing. 37 days into my stay, I discovered the compartment I had been running my hands. While tracing along the baseboards, searching for structural explanations, my fingers pressed against a section of wainscoting that gave way. A narrow panel slid open, revealing a hidden space no larger than a shoebox embedded in the wall. Inside lay a stack of cassette tapes, each labeled with a name and date, spanning all the way back to 1981. The most recent was from only 6 months ago. My hands trembled as I later found an old cassette player in a nearby second-hand shop. The weight of the device felt like a talisman against madness. I returned to my room, locked the door, and selected the oldest tape. A static hiss gave way to the weary voice of a young woman. Her Welsh accent was thick with exhaustion. "Elizabeth Morgan, physics student, 1981, she said. She described exactly what I'd been experiencing. The synchronized movements, the impossible clock, the subtle shifts in the room's dimensions. Her recordings spanned 3 months. Over time, her tone shifted from scientific curiosity to mounting dread. Her final entry mentioned patterns in the object's movements. Patterns she believed were equations, calculations describing something trying to solve its way into our dimension. I listened to each tape in chronological order. 12 individuals over 40 years, each documenting the same phenomena. A mathematician in 1987 filled his walls with formulas. A psychology researcher in 1993 believed the room responded to her subconscious. A theology student in 1999 was convinced he was witnessing time bleeding through from purgatory. The progression was unmistakable. Each tenant's experience was more intense than the last. The clock's influence grew stronger with every new occupant. The most recent, a quantum physics doctoral candidate named Marcus Schaefer, had filled his tapes with increasingly fractured theoretical models. His final recording contained only his labored breathing and the amplified ticking of the clock, punctuated by occasional, whispered phrases. "It's solving us," "thinning the membrane." Goosebumps crawled across my skin as I realized I was part of an ongoing sequence. A progression. Whatever had begun decades ago was accelerating, and I was merely the latest variable in its equation. That night, the manifestations intensified. My phone vibrated across the nightstand, fell to the floor, and continued sliding toward the clock. In the closet, my clothes shifted, sleeves reaching out in synchronized motions like seaweed drifting in a current. The room temperature fluctuated wildly. Sweat crystallized on my skin before clinking onto the hardwood in tiny ice particles. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs as a ballpoint pen rose from the desk and hovered, motionless, suspended in air, while everything else swirled around it. It was the one fixed point in a universe gone fluid that terrified me more than any movement could have. This force wasn't merely rearranging objects, it was redefining the relationships between them. Sleep was impossible. I sat frozen in the desk chair, the room seeming to breathe, expanding and contracting with each thunderous tick. The symbols on the clock's face began to rotate, realigning into configurations that burned into my vision, lingering even when I shut my eyes. My mind calculated without consent, trying to solve equations I couldn't consciously comprehend. My nose bled again. A single droplet hovered, then was drawn in a perfect line toward the clock's face. The pendulum, which had kept perfect time for weeks, began to slow. Each swing stretched longer, the tick-tock elongating into deep, reverberating booms that echoed through my marrow. I should have fled, but fear and curiosity held me fast. The academic in me still believed there had to be a rational explanation, some strange but ultimately physical phenomenon. But the primal part of me knew I was in the presence of something ancient. something utterly alien to human understanding. As dawn approached, the pendulum stopped mid-swing, frozen at an impossible angle that defied gravity. Silence crashed down on me like a wave. Every object, books, clothes, furniture, even dust, was suspended mid-air. And then, everything moved at once. Not toward the clock as I expected, but toward me. Not violently, but with terrifying precision, like iron filings aligning to a magnet. My ears popped as the air pressure shifted. The walls bowed inward. Reality folded. Space compressed. Distances became meaningless. In that moment of dimensional vertigo, I understood then what the others had only approached, never fully grasped. The clock wasn't the cause of the movements were causing the clock. We, the succession of tenants, had been participants in a vast calculation unfolding over decades. Our observations, our measurements, our very presence had been necessary components in a process now nearing completion. The clock's face cracked clean down the middle. From within came not gears or springs, but a darkness deeper than absence, a presence for which human perception had no analog. I felt my consciousness stretch, thinning as if pulled across an infinite plane. The sensation lasted either an eternity or mere milliseconds. Time had no meaning in that space. When reality reasserted itself, I was crumpled on the floor. My nose was bleeding. My ears rang. The clock looked unchanged. Its pendulum swung with perfect tempo. But something fundamental had shifted. When I rose to unsteady feet, my shadow remained behind for 3 full ticks of the clock before sliding up to rejoin me. When I spoke, I heard my voice before my lips moved. When I reached for the wall, my fingertips touched its seconds before my hand fully extended. I understood then the boundary between cause and effect had collapsed in that room. Temporal sequence had become malleable, optional. The clock hadn't been measuring time. It had been redefining it. I fled that morning, leaving most of my belongings behind. Mrs. Pritchard accepted my sudden departure with a knowing resignation. She refused my offer to pay out the lease. Her parting words still haunt me. It usually takes them longer to leave. You must be quicker than the others. I stayed with a university colleague for 2 days before securing another apartment across the city. I tried to dismiss the experience, tried to rationalize it as a hallucination brought on by stress or an elaborate prank. But the evidence followed me. My watch now runs exactly 3.17 seconds fast, no matter how often I reset it. When I pour coffee, the liquid reaches the rim of the cup before leaving the pot. Sometimes, my reflection in the mirror continues moving for a beat after I've stopped. Most disturbing of all, I've begun to dream of equations, complex, recursive mathematical formulas describing the folding of spacetime around a fixed point. In the dreams, I understand them completely. When I wake, they vanish, leaving behind only the certainty that something fundamental was altered in that room. Yesterday, I recorded my experience on a cassette tape. Tomorrow, I will return to the house, just long enough to place it in the hidden compartment behind the wall. Not for a future tenant to find. I understand now, we weren't meant to discover the tapes. Their purpose, like ours, was simply to be present, to act as variables in the calculation. And the equation is still solving itself. With each passing day, I become more convinced we succeeded in opening something that was never meant to be opened. The clock ticks on. Even miles away, I hear it. In dreams. In the silence between sentences. In the spaces between heartbeats. Time has acquired a texture. I can feel it brushing against my skin. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake to find my possessions have shifted, ever so slightly, from where I left them. Each one moving in perfect synchronization, with a clock that isn't there. The woodland sounds had gradually disappeared. No bird song, no rustling of small animals. Just our footfalls and increasingly labored breathing cutting through the unnatural silence. We had been hiking the Cascade Trails for 3 days documenting forgotten historical sites for Tyler's anthropology dissertation. This region was known for its hidden stone structures, remnants of 19th century settlements long abandoned. But nothing in our research had mentioned anything like what we now approached. The trees thinned and my breath caught in my throat. Before us stood a perfect circle of standing stones. 12 in total, each about 7 feet tall and covered in a thick carpet of moss and lichen. They weren't the rough megaliths you'd expect from ancient constructions, but rather perfectly rectangular columns precisely spaced around a central clearing about 30 feet in diameter. The blood trail led directly to the circle's center before disappearing completely. "This isn't on any of the maps," Mark finally spoke, his voice cracking. He pulled out his phone, frantically searching for a signal. I didn't need to see the screen to know there wouldn't be one. The heavy feeling in my gut told me we were completely isolated. I conveyed that we should document the site quickly and leave before darkness fell. Tyler agreed immediately, his usual archaeological enthusiasm notably dampened. Mark hesitated, his eyes transfixed on the center of the stone circle where the bloody footprints vanished. There was something in his gaze I couldn't identify, not fear but something closer to recognition. I brushed it off as the stress of our discovery. Tyler began photographing the stones while I walked the perimeter, noting details in my journal. Each stone had markings not obvious at first glance but visible upon closer inspection. Symbols carved into the rock, then weathered by time. Some resembled letters from forgotten alphabets. Others looked like crude representations of human figures in various poses. My fingers traced one that depicted a person with arms outstretched, legs spread in a star pattern. The stone felt unnaturally cold, pulling heat from my fingertips like a greedy parasite. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing. I checked my watch again. Sunset would be upon us soon. I called to the others, suggesting we head back when Mark's voice stopped me. "Look at the ground," he said, pointing to the center of the circle where the bloody footprints had disappeared. The grass now appeared withered in a perfect circle, as if something caustic had been poured over it. In the center of this dead patch was a small object. Against my better judgment, I approached it. It was a pocket watch, antique brass with intricate engravings, its chain coiled like a copper serpent on the dead grass. I knelt for a closer look without touching it. The watch face was cracked, its hands frozen at 6:47 p.m., 34 minutes from now. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying a scent like copper and wet earth. The temperature dropped precipitously. My breath now billowed in thick clouds as I backed away from the watch. Something was very wrong. "We need to leave," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now." But as I turned toward the gap between two stones where we had entered, I realized with a sickening lurch that I couldn't identify it anymore. All the gaps looked identical, and the forest beyond seemed to shift and waver like a mirage. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in bloody hues of orange and crimson. Long shadows stretched from the stones, converging toward the center like dark fingers reaching for the dead patch of grass. Tyler's camera flashed repeatedly as he documented the phenomenon, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his fear. Mark stood motionless, staring at the pocket watch. "Don't touch it," I warned, but my voice sounded distant and hollow as if the air itself was thinning. Mark looked up at me, his expression blank. "It's starting," he said simply. Before I could question him, a low humming filled the air, more felt than heard, vibrating in my chest cavity and making my teeth ache. The shadows from the stones darkened and solidified, creating a web of blackness across the ground. At the center where the pocket watch lay, a figure began to materialize. At first, I thought it was smoke rising from the ground, a dark column twisting upward, but it quickly took form. A hooded figure, tall and unnaturally thin, its face completely obscured by darkness beneath the cowl. It wore what appeared to be a tattered robe that didn't move with the wind but rather seemed to undulate with its own internal current. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mouth gone desert dry. Tyler had stopped taking pictures. His camera hung forgotten at his side. Mark hadn't moved, his expression now one of terrible anticipation. The hooded figure stood perfectly still for several long moments. Then slowly it raised its right arm out to the side. To my horror, I found my own right arm raising in perfect synchronicity as if pulled by invisible strings. The figure tilted its head, I tilted mine. It shifted its weight to one foot, and my body followed suit without my conscious command. Panicked, I looked at my companions. Tyler was mirroring the figure's movements too, his face contorted in terror. But Mark was smiling. I tried to scream, but my voice emerged only as a wheeze. The figure began to move in a deliberate pattern, stepping forward then to the side, arms raising and lowering in specific configurations. Our bodies followed each movement precisely, puppets to this silent choreographer. With each step, the symbols on the stones glowed faintly, responding to our movements. My mind raced through possibilities. Hypnosis, hallucination, some kind of airborne toxin. But deep down, I knew we were experiencing something beyond rational explanation. Sweat soaked through my clothes despite the chilling air. My muscles strained against the invisible force controlling them, but resistance proved futile. Each forced movement sent shooting pains through my joints as if my body was being stretched beyond its natural limits. Through the panic clouding my thoughts, I noticed something crucial. The glowing symbols corresponded to our movements. The figure wasn't moving randomly. It was demonstrating a pattern, a sequence related to the symbols carved into the stones. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was a test or ritual of some kind. Tyler had noticed it too. His eyes darted between the stones, tracking the sequence of illuminated symbols. Our eyes met briefly, a flash of understanding passing between us. We needed to decode this pattern. The figure increased its pace, movements becoming more complex. My limbs burned with exertion as they were forced to comply. I focused desperately on memorizing the sequence. Left arm raised, right foot forward, bow, spin clockwise, arms outstretched. Mark continued moving with fluid ease, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. Had he known about this place? The thought slithered into my mind like a venomous snake. Had he led us here intentionally? The pocket watch at the center suddenly chimed an impossible sound from its broken form. The figure froze, and we froze with it. Then slowly, it retreated to the center of the circle, releasing us from its mirroring hold. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. Tyler did the same, while Mark remained standing. His posture relaxed as if he'd just finished a pleasant stroll rather than a forced supernatural mimicry. What the hell is happening? I hissed at him, suspicion and fear making my voice tremble. Mark turned to me, his eyes reflecting the last crimson rays of the setting sun. "The Mirror Guardian," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "It shows the way out if you're clever enough to see it." Tyler crawled toward me, his face pale and slick with sweat. He leaned close, whispering that he thought he understood the pattern. It corresponded to the symbols on specific stones, creating a sequence. If we could replicate it correctly on our own, he believed it might release us. The darkness deepened as the sun vanished completely below the horizon. The only light now came from the faintly glowing symbols on the stones and a sickly phosphorescence emanating from the hooded figure. The humming intensified, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. The figure began to move again, but differently this time. More fluid, almost dance-like. Our bodies remained our own, no longer forced to mirror its movements. Instead, it pointed to us, then gestured around the circle. The message was clear. It was our turn to perform. Mark stepped forward confidently, beginning to recreate the sequence of movements we'd been shown. Tyler and I exchanged uncertain glances before joining him. Our movements were clumsy and hesitant compared to his practiced precision. As we moved, following the pattern as best we could remember, the stone's glow intensified. My skin tingled with static electricity, the air growing dense and difficult to breathe. The figure watched from the center, its hooded head tracking our every move. When we made mistakes, a turn in the wrong direction, an arm raised instead of lowered, the figure would shake its head slightly, and the humming would deepen to a painful degree. On our third attempt, Tyler stumbled, breaking the sequence. The figure responded immediately, rushing toward him with impossible speed. I cried out a warning, but it was too late. The figure's hand, pale and corpse-like, touched Tyler's forehead. Tyler went rigid, his eyes rolling back. When the figure retreated, Tyler moved with mechanical precision, no longer making errors. His face was expressionless, eyes vacant. Terror clawed at my throat as Mark and I continued the sequence. I couldn't afford mistakes. Couldn't end up like Tyler, present but absent, a perfect mirror with no will of his own. My limbs felt lean with exhaustion, but I forced them to comply with the pattern. Left, right, turn, bow, arms out. We completed the sequence once more, and the stones blazed with blue-white light, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, one of the gaps between the stones glowed brighter than the others. An exit. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me toward it. Now he shouted, "Run!" I hesitated, looking back at Tyler, who stood motionless, still staring vacantly at the figure. "We can't leave him," I said. Mark's grip tightened painfully. "He's part of it now. We can't help him." I yanked free of his grip. Despite my exhaustion, I lunged toward Tyler, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the glowing exit. His body moved sluggishly, resistant, but he didn't fight me directly. The figure turned toward us, its movement suggesting anger. The humming became a piercing whine that made blood trickle from my nose. Mark had already dashed through the gap between the stones. I pushed Tyler ahead of me, then turned to face the figure one last time. Beneath its hood, I caught a glimpse of a face, or rather the absence of one. Where features should have been, there was only a reflective surface like mercury, distorting and reflecting my own terrified expression back at me. I stumbled backward through the gap, falling into Mark's arms on the other side. Tyler came through a moment later, collapsing to the ground. The glowing gap between the stones dimmed, then vanished completely, leaving only ordinary darkness. We were outside the circle, back in the forest. The bloody footprints were gone. My watch read 6:47 p.m. exactly. Tyler lay unconscious but breathing steadily. Mark helped me lift him, and together we staggered through the dark forest, using our phone flashlights to guide us back to the trail. Tyler woke an hour later as we approached our car. He remembered everything but seemed changed. Quieter, more introspective, his movements occasionally syncing with mine or Mark's without him noticing. Mark avoided my questions about how he had known what to do, deflecting with vague comments about research and local legends. That night in our motel room, I examined the photographs on Tyler's camera. The stone circle appeared in sharp detail, but the hooded figure was absent from every image. Instead, in the center of each photo, there were three blurry human silhouettes arranged in the exact positions Mark, Tyler, and I had been standing when the picture was taken. In the final photograph, taken just before sunset, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Carved into the center stone, barely visible beneath centuries of moss, was an inscription. As above, so below. As within, so without. As the universe, so the soul. I haven't slept properly since that day. Sometimes, from the corner of my eye, I catch Tyler mirroring my movements before I make them, as if he's seeing something I can't. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my reflection hesitates for just a fraction of a second before following me. Mark disappeared a week after our return. His apartment was empty except for dozens of papers covered in the symbols from the stones, arranged in the pattern we had performed. I've tried to find the stone circle again, making 3 return trips to the area. The trail is there, the forest is there, but the circle is gone or hidden from me. Part of me is relieved. A larger part knows that whatever happened there isn't finished with us. The pocket watch arrived in my mail yesterday, ticking steadily despite its cracked face. I don't know who sent it. I don't want to know. His hands move steadily, counting down to something I can't understand. Sometimes, in the right light, I can see a hooded figure reflected in its brass case, waiting for me to complete the dance. That first Monday I did exactly that, a quick, perfunctory press of the horn. It answered back. Not an echo. An answer. My exact horn tone, pitch, and duration, but delayed by 3 seconds and emanating unmistakably from within the warehouse's dark interior. I nearly swerved off the road, coffee splashing across my pressed work trousers. I kept driving, attributing the phenomenon to some acoustic oddity. a bizarre reflection of sound. Buildings don't respond to car horns. Tuesday, I approached the corner with scientific determination. I would test my hypothesis. This time, 2 short beeps. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I waited. 1, 2, 3. Then, 2 identical beeps, perfectly matching mine, sounding from deep within the warehouse. By Friday, I had tried every variation I could think of. Long and short pulses, odd patterns, even melodic sequences. Each one was returned, flawlessly mirrored after the same 3-second delay. Rational explanations had evaporated. No echo behaves that way. No prankster could replicate the exact tonal quality of my horn with such precision. The weekend gave brief reprieve, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the warehouse. I searched online for Meridian storage and processing and found only references to a defunct company that had filed for bankruptcy in 1997. No recent records. No rational context for what I had encountered. Monday arrived cloaked in a dense fog, transforming the morning commute into a silent procession through cotton wool. The warehouse emerged like a smudge in my periphery, darker than the surrounding grayness. Something compelled me to pull over. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I eased onto the shoulder. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. I sat there for minutes, heart hammering against my ribs, questioning what I was about to do. Rational people don't investigate abandoned warehouses because of ghostly car horn mimicry. Yet here I was. The air was thick and still unnaturally so. I approached the fence. The main gate was padlocked, but further down, a section of chain link had been peeled back, creating a narrow, jagged opening, just wide enough to squeeze through. My shirt snagged on rusted wire as I forced myself through, the rip of fabric loud in the morning hush. The warehouse's main entrance was a colossal sliding door, slightly ajar, just enough for a person to slip inside, but not without the gut-deep awareness of crossing some unseen threshold. I hesitated. My breath came fast. Sweat trickled down my back despite the chill. No signal. My phone showed 0 bars. If anything happened, no one would know. Still, I switched on my flashlight and stepped inside. The space was vast, its high ceiling swallowed by darkness. The concrete floor was strewn with splintered pallets, yellowed papers, broken glass. It smelled of mildew, dust, and something metallic that made me think, irrationally, of blood. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Each drop echoed across the emptiness. I swept my light across the room. Rusted machines, collapsed shelving, graffiti-scrawled walls. Nothing that explained what I'd experienced. Then my beam landed on a door at the far end. Not oversized, not dramatic, just wrong. It was clean. No dust, no tags. Its red paint was bright, unblemished, vibrant against the warehouse decay. I moved toward it, unable to stop myself. Each step echoed strangely, delayed, like a recording played back out of sync. The mismatch between movement and sound turned my stomach, distorting my sense of space and time. The red door had no handle, just a small rectangular metal plate where one should have been. I pressed my palm to it. It swung inward effortlessly, revealing a hallway that could not exist. According to the building's exterior, there was no space for what stretched before me. Yet the corridor extended into impossible distance. It was pristine, eerily so. Stark white walls, spotless tile floor reflecting harsh fluorescent light overhead. Every 20 feet, a red door on each side. Identical, handleless, closed. I stepped through, and the door behind me shut with a whispering click. I turned, heart stuttering. Gone. Only a seamless white wall remained. Panic surged. My mouth went dry. A white-tiled corridor inside an impossible building. The door has vanished behind him. Red doors line the walls. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Action. He presses his palms against the wall where the door had been, finding only cool, solid surface. There is no way back. He proceeds forward. Each footstep triggers an unsettling echo delay. 3 seconds later, each step repeats behind him, perfectly matching his pace. He quickens. The echoes quicken. He stops. 3 seconds later, the footsteps cease. As he walks deeper into the corridor, new sounds emerge, fragments of conversation in his own voice. He hears mundane discussions from his daily life, a phone call with his boss, an argument with his ex-girlfriend, a joke told at last year's Christmas party. Each phrase leaks from behind the red doors as he passes, recalled with perfect clarity. Conversations from months or even years ago. His terror grows physical. Sweat soaks through his shirt. His breath shortens. A tremor settles into his hands. He tries the doors, they will not open. Then, laughter. His own, ahead of him. Not recorded, not mechanical, live, like someone else's version of him is laughing at a private joke. He calls out. His voice cracks under strain. The corridor replies, not with echo, but repetition. His exact words, his exact voice, spoken from behind him. He whirls. Nothing. Just hallway. Turning forward again, he sees one red door slightly ajar. Warm light spills from it onto the tile floor. He approaches. His footsteps no longer echo. The sound is absorbed or cancelled. He peers through the gap and sees a perfect copy of his living room. Coffee stain on the armrest, unread magazines on the side table. But that's impossible. His apartment is miles away. He's in a corridor inside an abandoned warehouse. He pushes the door wider. Everything is as he left it that morning, except for one thing. In his favorite chair sits a figure that looks exactly like him. He stares back with equal shock and horror. Neither moves. Then he raises his hand. The figure raises its hand. He steps back. It does too. But each movement is delayed 3 seconds behind. A terrible understanding begins to form. This isn't another version of him. This is him from 3 seconds in the past. The exact delay he first noticed with the echoing footsteps. He waves his hand in a deliberate pattern. The figure mimics it 3 seconds later. To test it further, he speaks a random phrase, blue carousel under moonlight. 3 seconds pass. Then the figure's lips move, forming the same words. But something shifts. The figure's eyes widen. 2 is realizing the truth. If he's watching the figure echo his actions, and the figure is clearly experiencing the same, then who is the original? Which of them is the echo? He backs away. So does the double. A crushing weight of existential terror bears down on him. Is he the real person or the echo? The copy? The reflection? His memories feel real. But what if they are only reconstructions? In desperate need of confirmation, he rushes to another door and throws it open. Inside is his childhood bedroom recreated exactly. On the bed sits a 10-year-old version of himself. The boy looks up, not surprised but expectant. "Are you the real one?" he asks, barely audible over his thundering heartbeat. The boy smiles sadly. The man braces for a repeat of his words, 3 seconds delayed. But the boy doesn't echo. Instead, the child replies, "That's what we all want to know." He slams the door shut, gasping. Sweat drips from his face onto the polished floor. The hallway shifts, stretching and contracting, the perspective warping. Reality fractures. More doors open along the corridor. Behind each, moments from his life. Versions of himself. Different ages, different times. All watching him with the same questioning expression. He runs. Past dozens of doors. Past glimpses of his life. Each frame, each version. A perfect, haunting echo. He runs until his lungs burn. Until his legs threaten to give. Monologue. Each step I take, something follows just out of sync. Each word I speak, someone else repeats it, me but not me. How many reflections are there? How many copies? I thought I was retracing memory. But now I wonder if I've ever been the source. Maybe I've always been the reflection. A recording. A reconstruction. What if the original walked this corridor long ago? What if I'm just next in line? The darkness in the caves of Vito breathes. I know this now. It inhales your presence and exhales something else. Something that wears your movements like an ill-fitting suit. I came to map these caverns, but instead I discovered a terrible truth. In the deepest recesses of these ancient formations, you don't merely cast shadows. You create echoes of yourself. The Bulgarian Speleological Society had warned me about the technical challenges of mapping the newly discovered cave network in the Western Balkans. But what they failed to mention were the peculiarities that couldn't be explained by geology. I should have paid closer attention to the villagers below, to the way they crossed themselves when I mentioned my destination, or how they insisted I take extra batteries for my headlamp. I dismissed their nervous glances toward the looming mountain as superstition. Americans? The innkeeper muttered when I laughed off his concern. Always believing only what your instruments tell you. I'd been underground for 3 days, methodically documenting the extensive labyrinth that stretched beneath the karst landscape. My satellite phone maintained tenuous contact with base camp, though our conversations were increasingly punctuated by static. Still, progress was steady. My specialized equipment captured precise measurements, data that would eventually render the most comprehensive map of this subterranean world ever created. The first anomaly appeared on day 4. My laser measuring device began returning inconsistent readings, distances inexplicably expanding and contracting by several centimeters between identical measurements. I recalibrated the device repeatedly, attributing the discrepancies to high humidity affecting the instruments. It was a rational explanation that satisfied me, until I noticed the temperature fluctuations. The deeper chambers of such cave systems should maintain a stable temperature, roughly 52 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. Yet my thermometer recorded strange cold spots that seemed to move, drifting through the cavern like invisible bodies. In certain areas, the temperature plummeted by as much as 15 degrees, only to slowly return to normal. Each time I attempted to approach one of these anomalies, it slipped just out of reach, as if deliberately avoiding me. That night, I reviewed my notes by the glow of my camp lantern. For the first time, I felt a persistent unease. The stone walls seemed to absorb the light differently than before, not reflecting it but consuming it. The shadows deepened, spreading across the chamber in ways that defied logic. Places that should have held ambient illumination instead vanished into complete darkness. Sleep came uneasily. I dreamt of pale spiders descending from the cavern ceiling, their legs moving with mechanical precision as they spun webs resembling intricate mathematical equations. I awoke drenched in sweat despite the chill in the air, my heart pounding like a trapped bird inside my chest. My watch read 3:27 a.m., and then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping from somewhere beyond the light, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision, exactly every 17 seconds. I counted. I timed it. I told myself it was water dripping onto stone. A harmless, natural explanation. But the chamber I had chosen for camp was completely dry. By morning, the tapping had stopped. I told myself it was the isolation, a common psychological response to extended periods underground. But even as I packed up my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cave hadn't just been observing me. It had been learning. After a breakfast of protein bars and tepid coffee, I pushed deeper into the system, determined to reach the large chamber my preliminary scans had indicated lay about half a kilometer ahead. The passage narrowed considerably, forcing me to crouch and, at times, crawl on hands and knees. My headlamp cast elongated shadows across the limestone formations, shadows that seemed to linger a beat too long after I'd moved past. I found myself glancing back again and again, unable to shake the distinct sensation of being followed. But when the tunnel finally opened into the massive chamber, all apprehension fell away. The space was breathtaking, easily 100 meters across, with a ceiling that soared far beyond the reach of my light. Massive columns of flowstone stretched from floor to ceiling, like the ancient pillars of some forgotten cathedral. Stalactites clustered densely above, their crystalline surfaces refracting my light into prismatic ribbons that danced along the cave walls. I set up my surveying equipment methodically, recording measurements and photographing the most significant features. Hours passed in silent work, my attention consumed entirely by documentation. It wasn't until I reached the far side of the chamber that I noticed something odd. A section where the stalactites grew in an unnaturally symmetrical pattern, almost like bars, like the bars of a cage. And behind them, barely visible in the gloom, was a pale shape. At first, I assumed it was just another mineral formation, perhaps a rare instance of helictite growth, warped sideways instead of yielding to gravity. But when I adjusted my headlamp and shone the beam directly at it, the shape moved. My breath caught in my throat. A cold sweat broke across my forehead as I locked the beam in place. The pale figure crouched low to the ground. It was humanoid but wrong, impossibly thin, its proportions just slightly off. It remained perfectly still, as if hoping to be mistaken for stone. Scientific curiosity briefly overpowered my fear. I stepped closer, slowly, sweeping my light across the bars of stalactites for a better view. The figure stayed motionless, but I could now make out more details. Its skin was the color of cave clay, that sickly white-gray tone born of complete absence from sunlight. It had no visible features. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just smooth flesh stretched tightly over what resembled the rough shape of a human skull. I raised my hand slowly, part gesture of non-aggression, part test to see if it would react. It did. 3 seconds passed. Then it raised its own hand, mirroring my movement in a jerky, uncertain way. My stomach twisted with a primal fear I hadn't felt since childhood. I lowered my hand. 3 seconds later, it lowered its hand. I took a step to the right. 3 seconds later, it moved right. I stepped left. Followed, same delay. I began backing away, slowly, observing this bizarre mimicry with growing dread. Every movement I made, it mirrored, always 3 seconds behind. It was studying me, learning the mechanics of how I moved, how I existed in space. That's when I noticed the ground beneath my feet. My headlamp cast a familiar pool of light, but something was missing. My shadow. I shifted my position, trying different angles. Still nothing. No matter how I moved, there was no shadow cast on the cave floor. The realization hit me like a blow. My lungs seized, breath caught. I spun in a full circle, searching in panic for that simple silhouette, the one constant presence I had always taken for granted. But it was gone, as if the darkness had swallowed it whole. When I looked back at the figure, it had moved closer, no longer confined by the stalactite bars. And then I saw it. God help me. A faint shadow now stretched from its feet, responding not to its movement, but mine. My shadow. It had taken it. Panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my headlamp. The figure advanced with that same 3-second delay, but it moved more fluidly now, with a jerky grace that seemed to be evolving into something almost natural. It was getting better, more human. I ran. The beam of my headlamp swung wildly across the formations as I bolted back toward the tunnel I'd come through. Behind me, I heard it. A dry, skittering sound, like brittle leaves scraping across pavement. It was following, with my shadow sliding beneath it like spilled ink. The narrowing tunnel slowed me down. I was forced to twist and contort through the tightest passages, my gear snagging on outcroppings. My breathing grew ragged, echoing in the close quarters. A panicked, distorted chorus that made it impossible to gauge how close it was. But I could still hear that sound, that rustling. It was gaining on me, and I was only halfway through the tunnel. My headlamp flickered once, twice, then darkness engulfed me. The absolute blackness of a deep cave is unlike any other darkness. It is complete, consuming, almost solid in its totality. I froze, paralyzed by sudden blindness, my hands shaking so violently I could barely find the spare batteries in my pocket. Action in that perfect darkness. I felt something brush against my ankle, a touch so light it might have been a spider's web. Yet it carried an electric chill that shot up my spine. I jerked away, smashing my shoulder against the tunnel wall, pain blooming across my collarbone. With trembling fingers, I managed to replace the batteries, and the light returned. The tunnel behind me was empty, but a fine, powdery substance coated the ground where I'd felt the touch. A substance that shifted and dissolved even as I looked at it, like frost evaporating in the morning sun. I didn't wait to investigate further. Monologue I scrambled through the remaining length of the tunnel, emerging into my base camp area with such force that I knocked over my portable stove, sending it clattering across the stone floor. The noise echoed throughout the chamber. then echoed again when no echo should remain, and again. Each repetition slightly distorted, as if the sound itself were being learned and imperfectly reproduced. I grabbed essential supplies, stuffing them haphazardly into my pack. My satellite phone emitted only static when I tried to call for early extraction. The map I'd been creating over days of careful work fluttered to the ground as I rushed to break down my tent. I left it there, no longer caring about the documentation. As I prepared to leave, movement caught the corner of my eye, a whitish blur at the tunnel entrance. The figure had followed. But now it moved differently. The 3-second delay was gone. It tracked my movements in perfect synchronization. And my shadow lay beneath it, perfectly aligned with its form. Seen fighting against rising panic, I slowly lifted my pack and slung it over my shoulders. The figure did the same with nothing but air. Yet the movements matched mine exactly. I took a deliberate step forward. It mirrored me instantaneously. A theory formed in my mind, terrible in its implications but offering a slim chance of escape. If this entity had somehow captured my shadow and was using it to learn how to move like me, perhaps I could disrupt that connection. I reached for my last emergency flare. Action the figure reached as well, its arm extending at precisely the same angle as mine. With deliberate calm, I struck the flare to life. Brilliant crimson light erupted, filling the chamber with harsh illumination that banished all shadows. The effect on the entity was immediate and horrifying. It convulsed violently, its form seeming to melt and reform as the flare's light created multiple overlapping shadows that shifted and danced across the cavern walls. A high-pitched keening filled the air, a sound that resonated in my bones and made my eyes water. I seized the moment of its distress and ran for the ascending passage that would eventually lead to the surface. Behind me, the keening changed pitch, becoming deeper, angrier. The sound of pursuit resumed, faster now, more confident in its movements. Monologue the ascent was punishing. Passages I had navigated easily on the way down now seemed longer, more complex. My breath came in burning gasps, muscles screaming with the effort of climbing while carrying my pack. Several times, I heard the thing gaining on me, that dry, rustling sound drawing closer before I managed to put distance between us again. Hours blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and fear. The flare eventually died. But by then I had reached areas where ambient light from the entrance filtered down through fissures in the rock. These thin beams of natural light seemed to create boundaries the entity was reluctant to cross directly, forcing it to find alternative routes to continue its pursuit. When I finally emerged from the cave entrance, late afternoon sunlight momentarily blinded me. I collapsed onto the rocky ground, gulping fresh air into my burning lungs. Birds called from nearby trees, an ordinary sound that now seemed miraculous in its normality. I lay there for several minutes, waiting for my pursuer to emerge. Nothing came. Eventually, I dared to look back at the dark mouth of the cave. A pale hand, too long in the fingers, too fluid in its movements, rested just inside the threshold where shadow met sunlight. As I watched, it retreated slowly into darkness. That night, safely back in the village, bathroom, night. I stand in front of the bathroom mirror, scrutinizing my reflection under pale overhead light. My face looks the same, but when I move, there's a hesitation. Subtle. A fraction of a second delay before the image catches up. Action. I test it again. Shift weight from one foot to the other. My reflection follows, but just barely too late. My breath hitches. I wave a hand quickly. The mirrored gesture lags, nearly imperceptibly. I glance downward. The lamplight throws my shadow long across the floorboards. But the posture is wrong. I stand upright. The silhouette is just slightly off, as if remembering how to mimic. Monologue. I've been back from the Balkans for 3 weeks now. The Bulgarian Speleological Society was polite but unimpressed. My maps incomplete, my gear damaged, my accounts fragmented. Some called it stress. Others whispered addiction. None of them see it. My shadow. Every day it responds a little slower. Every night it grows a little bolder. I've seen it shifting on its own, testing angles, practicing movement while it thinks I'm asleep. So I've made a decision. I've booked passage to Antarctica. 6 months of daylight. No shadows. No mimicry. Time to figure out how to sever the link. If that's even still possible. But even now, as I write this, I feel its presence. The studying me improving. And with a clarity that gnaws at my sanity, I know, whatever followed me back from that cave isn't copying anymore. It's evolving. Scene. In studio apartment above abandoned bakery. Night. The faintest scent creeps in before consciousness returns. Butter sizzling. Touched with cinnamon and something darker, loamy, earthen. I wake instantly. Body tense. Clock. 2:43 a.m. Action. I sit up, sniffing the air. This is the 4th night in a row. That same impossible smell drifting up from the kitchen below. A bakery that hasn't been used in almost a decade. Monologue. When I first moved here, the real estate agent called it a charming studio with unique architectural features. She didn't mention the abandoned bakery beneath it. 9 years empty. But it was Manhattan and the rent was manageable. The high ceilings, worn floors, they had character. Or maybe I was just desperate. The first week was uneventful. I filled the space with sparse furniture, tried to make it home. My job, editing technical manuals, was dull but stable. Evenings were spent wandering the city, anonymous and alone, comforted by the rhythm of its indifference. But in week 2, things changed. That Tuesday night, I remember it. I dozed off to documentaries. Then the smell woke me. Baking bread. Not generic. Specific. Nostalgic. Familiar in a way that clawed at some buried part of me. And the clock. Always 2:43 a.m. At 2:43 a.m., the scent came again. This time unmistakably bread baking, with notes of rosemary and sea salt that made my mouth water, though I couldn't remember ever tasting anything like it. I searched the apartment, convinced a neighbor must be baking despite the hour, but the smell was strongest near the floor vent in the corner of my studio, the very vent connected to the bakery below. Pressing my ear against it, I thought I heard the faintest clatter of pans. The next morning, I persuaded the building manager to let me see the abandoned bakery. Dust covered everything. The massive industrial oven sat cold and silent, with no sign anyone had been there for years. The manager confirmed what I already suspected. The bakery had shut down nearly a decade ago when its owner disappeared without explanation. Disappeared? I asked. The manager shrugged and explained that Vincent LaRue, the middle-aged owner, had simply failed to open the bakery one morning. His apartment above the shop, my apartment now, was found empty. No personal belongings, no note, no forwarding address. The police investigated but found nothing suspicious. Just another New Yorker who vanished. That night, I searched Vincent LaRue online, finding little beyond some old articles about the bakery's grand opening 15 years earlier. One photo showed a thin man with intense eyes and a tight smile standing proudly outside his shop. Something about his gaze made my skin crawl, a hunger that went beyond ambition. The smells returned again at 2:43 a.m., caramelized sugar and vanilla, so intense I could almost taste it. I sat up, heart pounding against my ribs, and noticed condensation fogging the windows despite the apartment's chill. The air felt thick, almost syrupy, as if the bakery below were operating at full capacity. I pulled on a sweatshirt, grabbed a flashlight, and went downstairs. The building was eerily silent except for the hum of the ancient heating system. I tried the bakery door. It was locked as expected. Pressing my palm against it, I jerked back immediately. The metal was warm to the touch. Back in my apartment, the smell intensified. Closing my eyes, I was suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. Images flashed behind my eyelids. Hands dusted with flour kneading dough with practiced precision. Hands that weren't mine. Sensations I'd never experienced. A feeling of pride as customers lined up outside, mixed with something darker. A desperate need for validation. I woke hours later, drenched in sweat despite the cold room. The memories, because that's what they felt like, lingered with stark clarity. I could still feel the texture of the dough, sense the weight of expectations. These weren't dreams manufactured by my subconscious. They carried the unmistakable weight of lived experience. On the third night, I tried to stay awake past the witching hour. I made coffee, turned on all the lights, and played music loudly through my headphones. None of it mattered. At precisely 2:43 a.m., the smell of dark chocolate and sharp liqueur filled the apartment. My eyelids grew heavy almost instantly. This time, I didn't fight it. The memories came faster and more intensely. I was standing behind the counter, watching customers devour my creations with expressions of bliss. Their praise fed something inside me, something starving for decades. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Their enjoyment was temporary. Their memories of my work fleeting. I needed more. Needed to be remembered. Needed to. I jolted awake, throat raw as if I'd been screaming. The clock read 4:17 a.m. A migraine throbbed so fiercely that even the dim streetlight made my vision pulse. Worse, there were gaps in my own memories. I couldn't recall the name of my first pet or the color of my childhood bedroom walls. Small details, perhaps, but undeniably mine. Now, they were replaced by fragments of a life I hadn't lived. By the fourth night, tonight, I'd formed a theory. Vincent LaRue hadn't disappeared. He'd found a way to persist, embedding himself into the very foundations of the building. And now he was taking pieces of me, replacing my identity with his own, one memory at a time. I considered leaving, finding another apartment, but something told me it was already too late. Vincent had established a connection distance couldn't sever. Besides, I had nowhere else to go. My savings were depleted from the deposit and first month's rent. So tonight, I prepared. I set up my laptop to record while I slept. I wrote notes to myself, details of my life I couldn't bear to lose. My mother's birthday, the name of my college roommate, the taste of my grandmother's apple pie. I placed the notes in my pocket, hoping they might anchor me to myself. When the aroma came, ginger and molasses this time, I gripped the notes tightly and surrendered to sleep. The memories weren't random. They told a story unfolding chronologically, as if Vincent were deliberately showing me his life. Tonight I saw his childhood. A sterile home with parents who valued perfection above affection. I felt his loneliness, his discovery of baking as both escape and a desperate attempt to win approval that never came. I experienced his first success, the scholarship to culinary school, the years of training under master pâtissier in Paris. Then came the darkness, the growing obsession, the belief that through his creations he could make people love him. The recipes grew more complex, the ingredients more exotic. Customers returned with increasing frequency. Their eyes glazed, speaking of dreams filled with flavors they couldn't describe. I saw Vincent working late, adding something to his mixtures. Small vials of clear liquid, pinches of powder from unmarked containers. I felt his satisfaction as customers reported dreaming of memories that weren't their own, experiencing lives they hadn't lived. The visions shifted. Vincent alone in the bakery kitchen, his face gaunt, eyes hollow. His hands shook as he prepared a final recipe, something he believed would allow him to transcend physical limitations. I watched through his eyes as he combined ingredients, reciting words in a language I didn't understand but somehow comprehended. I felt the heat of the oven as he placed the creation inside, the anticipation as he waited, and then nothing. The memory ended abruptly, leaving me suspended between Vincent's consciousness and my own. I woke with a gasp, my body drenched in sweat so cold it felt like ice against my skin. The smell had changed, no longer enticing, but charred and acrid, like something left too long in an oven. My laptop had shut down despite being plugged in. The notes I'd written were still in my pocket, but when I pulled them out the paper was blank. My phone showed 5:21 a.m. I'd slept longer than previous nights, and the consequences were immediately apparent. Whole chunks of my personal history had vanished. I couldn't remember my father's face or where I'd gone to high school. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, my reflection seemed unfamiliar, as if I were viewing someone else's features. Vincent's memories, however, remained crystal clear. I could recall the precise temperature for perfect puff pastry, name every chef he'd studied under, know exactly how he'd modified his recipes to capture more than just his customers' palates. With trembling hands, I searched online for information about memory displacement and possession. Most results were fictional accounts or paranormal theories, nothing substantial enough to help me. In desperation, I expanded my search to include Vincent's techniques, the herbs, the incantations, the belief that certain combinations of flavor and aroma could open pathways between minds. To my surprise, I found scattered references across anthropological texts and obscure culinary histories. Ancient civilizations had used food as more than sustenance, as medicine, as communion with deities, as a means of preserving cultural memory. Some practices involved preparing dishes while focusing intensely on specific memories, believing the emotions and experiences could be transferred to those who consumed the food. Vincent hadn't disappeared. He'd transformed, embedding his consciousness into his final creation, a recipe designed to perpetuate his existence long after his physical form had gone. And now he was using me as a vessel, replacing my identity with his own. The question remained, why me? Was it random chance, or had he somehow selected me specifically? I reviewed what little I knew about my apartment's previous tenants. According to the building manager, no one had stayed longer than 6 months since Vincent's disappearance. Had they all experienced what I was experiencing? Had they fled before the process could complete? As morning light filtered through my windows, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. Running would only delay the inevitable while Vincent continued claiming pieces of me. Instead, I would confront him on his own terms. I spent the day preparing. I visited specialty grocery stores, gathering ingredients I somehow knew would be needed. My hands moved with confidence as I selected specific spices, examining their color and aroma with an expertise I'd never possessed. I found myself in a shop in Chinatown requesting herbs whose names I shouldn't have known. By evening, my apartment had transformed. The kitchen counter was covered with bowls of precisely measured ingredients. I'd pushed my furniture aside, creating a space in the center of the room where I placed a small portable burner. The rational part of me, what remained of my original self, recognized the absurdity of it all, but Vincent's knowledge provided certainty. As midnight approached, I began mixing ingredients, following. The instructions pulled from Vincent's memories guided me. My movements were precise, practiced. I recited words that felt ancient on my tongue, focusing on what remained of my own identity. Fragmentary and fading, but still mine. The aroma rising from the mixture was unlike anything I'd produced on previous nights. Sharper, more pungent, with undertones that made my skin prickle. I felt resistance from somewhere deep within the building, a pressure against my ears as if the air itself were protesting. By 2:40 a.m., everything was ready. I placed the final creation in a small clay vessel and positioned it over the flame. 3 minutes, that's all I needed. At precisely 2:43 a.m., as the concoction began to bubble, I felt him. Vincent's presence filled the room like smoke, pressing against me from all sides. The walls seemed to pulse. The floor beneath me vibrated with silent rage. I closed my eyes, allowing the remaining fragments of my identity to surface. The taste of my mother's stew, the sound of my best friend's laugh, the feeling of winter sun on my face in Central Park. I held these memories like shields as Vincent's consciousness battered against my own. The mixture on the burner changed color, turning from deep red to midnight black. The aroma intensified, no longer pleasant but raw and elemental. I dipped my fingers into the hot liquid, ignoring the pain, and traced symbols on my forehead. Symbols from Vincent's knowledge but serving my purpose. Voices filled my head, Vincent's primarily, raging against my resistance but others too. Faint whispers of previous tenants who had fled before completion, but not before losing pieces of themselves. Their fragments remained trapped within the building's walls, neither fully claimed by Vincent nor returned to their owners. I focused on these fragments, calling to them, offering them the mixture as anchor and vessel. The voices grew louder, more distinct. The room temperature plummeted. My breath fogged before me despite the heat of the burner. "You are not the first," Vincent's voice hissed inside my mind. "You will not be the last. This place is mine. These people are mine." I didn't answer with words. Instead, I overturned the vessel, spilling the mixture onto the floor. It spread unnaturally, flowing in precise patterns across the worn wood. The voices reached a crescendo as the liquid touched the walls. Suddenly, memories flooded back. Not just mine, but those of everyone who had lived here since Vincent's transformation. College graduations, first heartbreaks, childhood birthday parties. Hundreds of personal moments that Vincent had collected like trophies, using them to sustain himself while discarding the people to whom they belonged. The building shuddered. Plaster dust rained from the ceiling. The bakery ovens below roared to life with such force I could feel the heat through the floorboards. Vincent fought desperately, clinging to the memories he'd stolen, but the mixture had created a conduit. The fragments found their rightful owners, some still in New York, others scattered across the country. I felt them return to their proper places, leaving Vincent diminished. As dawn approached, the presence that had filled the apartment receded like a tide pulling back inch by inch. The smells faded. The voices quieted. By sunrise, I was alone again, surrounded by the evidence of the night's work but no longer sharing my mind with a desperate, hungry ghost. Vincent wasn't gone completely. I could still sense him faintly in the building's foundations, but he was contained, weakened beyond the ability to claim more victims. The borrowed memories remained with their rightful owners, including mine, returned but forever marked by their temporary displacement. I don't know if I'll stay in this apartment. Part of me says to run, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. But another part, the part that experienced firsthand the consequences of running without resolving, knows that Vincent will eventually regain strength if left unchecked. So, for now, I remain. I've converted the space below into a functioning kitchen again. Not a commercial bakery, but a place where I can monitor the boundary between Vincent's prison and the outside world. I bake bread each morning, simple recipes with no special ingredients, and share it with my neighbors, creating new memories to replace the ones that were nearly lost. And each night at 2:43 a.m., I wake briefly, checking for aromas that don't belong, ready to protect what is irreplaceable. The collection of experiences, emotions, and moments that make each of us who we are. The beer glass sits on the bar counter, amber liquid still swirling faintly, foam clinging to the sides in greasy rings. A glass I never served. A drink consumed by no one I could see. My name is Michael Harrow. I've been tending bar at Ali's for 6 years. Ever since my accounting degree led nowhere but mounting student loans and a studio flat that smelled of mildew and regret. The work isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills. Most nights follow the same rhythm. Serve drinks, listen to other people's problems, count the till, lock up, go home. Simple, predictable, until 3 weeks ago when the pattern broke. I was finalizing the night's receipts when I noticed it. A beer glass at the far end of the bar, full one moment, half empty the next, though no one sat at the stool. I blinked, convinced my tired eyes were playing tricks. But as I walked over to clear it, condensation formed around invisible fingers gripping the glass. The beer rose into nothingness, swallowed by an unseen throat, leaving behind a rim of saliva. My heart pounded against my ribs. I backed away, knocking over a bottle of Jack Daniels. It shattered on the floor, an explosion of glass and whiskey in the silence. I fled that night, leaving the register uncounted, the doors unlocked. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was exhaustion, a hallucination, too many doubles, not enough sleep. But then it happened again, and again, always at closing time, always the same. A single draft beer vanishing into thin air. Tonight, I've decided to face it. My palms are slick as I pretend to count the register, watching the glass from the corner of my eye. The beer lowers steadily, leaving foam rings on the inside, each ring slightly lower than the last, like watermarks on a draining lake, or the slow, inevitable descent of debt. My tongue feels thick, stuck to the roof of my mouth. I clear my throat. The beer freezes mid-air. The silence feels solid, like a pressure against my eardrums. "I know you're there," I manage to say, my voice a dry croak. The glass lowers slowly to the countertop. A perfect circle of condensation forms beneath it. Then, before my eyes, moisture begins to move across the polished wood. Not random drips, shapes, letters, words. My body locks up. The room temperature plummets, goosebumps rising along my arms. A foam trail appears on the floor, leading from the bar stool toward the back. Small wet footprints follow, too small for any adult but not quite right for a child either. The proportions are wrong, compressed, as if bearing an impossible weight. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I step out from behind the bar. The trail leads to the storage room door, partially open, though I remember shutting it. Beyond it, the narrow staircase descends into the basement. A damp cellar where we keep extra kegs and liquor. My breath comes in shallow gasps, each inhale thin, insufficient. The storage room light flickers as I approach, casting twitchy shadows that reach for me. The door creaks as I push it wider, the sound stretching into something like a moan. The foam trail glistens on the steps, vanishing into the dark. I know this place. I've worked here for years. The basement is just one room, concrete walls, no windows. There's nowhere down there to hide. Not for anything visible. Not for anything invisible either. Yet as I step down, 1 foot at a time, I'm consumed by a certainty. I am walking into something old and hungry. The wooden stairs groan beneath me. The air grows colder, carrying the scent of mildew and something else. Paper and ink. Like an old library, the bar-issued torch in my shaking hand casts a weak yellow beam into the gloom. The foam trail ends at the far wall, where stacked kegs loom like squat, twisted silhouettes. But there's something new, something that shouldn't be there. A desk, old mahogany, ornately carved, figures writhing in the wood. I can't quite make it out in the dim light. It sits where only bare floor should be, yet it gives the impression it's been there for decades, waiting. A massive, leather-bound ledger rests atop it, its cover cracked and worn, pages yellowed and curling at the edges. The book lies open. Columns of handwritten figures stretch across the visible pages. I approach slowly, every muscle in my body tensed, anticipating something. Attack, movement, a whisper from the dark. My torchlight trembles across the desk surface, revealing a small inkwell and an old-fashioned quill. The ink swirls inside the glass like a black tide, rising and falling in response to my proximity. My throat tightens. I want to turn back, but my feet don't listen. They move forward, slow and mechanical, like I'm being drawn by invisible strings. When the light finally lands on the pages, my blood goes cold. This is no ordinary ledger. The columns don't list amounts or currency. They list names, hundreds of them, and each is followed not by financial values but by emotions. Grief, 7 units. Despair, 13 units. Hope, 2 units severely past due. My eyes scan the cramped handwriting, heart thundering. I recognize them. Regulars. Patrons whose confessions I've absorbed across the bar night after night. Their trivial rants and buried sorrows. Each name is paired with precise measurements, emotional states harvested, catalogued, and balanced against invisible debts. With dawning horror, I realize this book doesn't just record these feelings. Contains them. Each entry pulses faintly beneath the ink. Tiny, shimmering flickers like fireflies trapped under parchment. A sound behind me. A soft scrape, something being dragged across concrete. I spin, the torch slicing through the dark. Nothing. The temperature drops. My breath appears in fragile clouds. When I turn back, the ledger has changed. It's open to a new page. And there, written in wet, glistening ink, is my name. Michael Harrow. The entry beside it is incomplete. A single word, followed by a number that ticks upward even as I watch. Fear, for 5, 6. A cold pressure settles on my shoulder. The unmistakable weight of a hand. I can't move, can't breathe. The torch slips from my fingers, clattering to the floor. It rolls, casting frantic shadows until the beam fixes on the wall behind the desk. Hundreds of tally marks cover the concrete. Some are ancient, nearly worn away. Others are fresh, still dusted with the white powder of scoring. clicks into place. This basement has never been just for storage. It's a collection point, a vault for emotions, a feeding ground for something that lives off the intangible. The pressure on my shoulder deepens, gently steering me toward the lone chair now sitting before the desk. I move like a marionette, my limbs no longer mine. As I lower into the seat, the leather groans, stretches as though adjusting to my shape or worse, remembering it. The inkwell bubbles. The quill lifts, weightless, suspended in the air. It dips into the ink, then hovers over the page, trembling. Black droplets fall, staining the paper beside my name. A voice speaks. Not aloud, but directly into my mind. Not words, but concepts. Ideas unfolding like poisonous flowers. Tells me how long I've been accruing debt. Every night behind the bar, I've siphoned off small emotions from the people I serve. A fragment of sorrow from the businessman drowning his rejection in bourbon. A whisper of rage from the builder crushed by layoffs. I eased their burdens, took in what they couldn't carry, but I never let them go. The emotions have accumulated, compounded. They've gained interest, and now the debt must be paid. The entity offers me a choice, stark and simple in its cruelty. Pay it all at once, release every suppressed emotion in one overwhelming flood. Or, take the job. Become the new bookkeeper. Collect emotions from others. Pay my debt slowly in installments. My body trembles. Sweat clings to my spine. My teeth chatter. I think they might shatter. The presence waits. Calm. Certain. A creditor with nowhere to be and nowhere I can run. I glance back at the ledger. Some names are crossed out. Not neatly, but violently. Jagged slashes torn through the paper. Desperate and final. Final payments made in full. I think of the invisible customer. The beer that vanished night after night. Not a ghost. Predecessor. Another bartender. Another ledger keeper. Another soul who chose poorly.